Okay, I think I'm going to share the slides. Oh, no, somebody's done it already. Right, okay, that's fine.
I'm on it, if that's okay.
Sorry, that's fine, yeah.
Is that all right? So first of all, welcome everybody who's online and for those listening. And I think probably the first thing we're going to do is just introduce ourselves as we go through. So I'm Detective Superintendent Tam Burgess from Suffolk Constabulary, and I'll just hand over to my colleagues. Michelle?
Oh, sorry, right, I didn't know who you were going to want it, so I think we were all going to do it. Hi, I'm Michelle Stauffer. I'm a County Safeguarding Manager for Suffolk County Council Children and Young People Services. I'm one of 3 County Safeguarding Managers in Suffolk, and my area is the south and the east of Suffolk. Tracy?
Yeah, I'm Tracy Murphy. I'm the Children's Professional Advisor for the Safeguarding Partnership.
Anthony, welcome.
Yes, hello. Anthony Douglas. I'm the chair of the Suffolk Safeguarding Partnership.
Will?
Good evening all. I'm Will Wright. I'm the Adult Professional Advisor at the Suffolk Safeguarding Partnership.
And Caroline?
Hi, I'm Caroline Holt, Designated Nurse Safeguarding Children. I work for the SNE, which is Suffolk and North East Essex Integrated Care Board, ICB, but I represent health across the Suffolk patch. And apologies, my camera isn't working. So what I could do, I could dip out, turn my laptop off and reboot again. So I might be able to get on camera or not. I don't know what anybody, have I got time to do that? Or shall I just carry on without you being able to see me?
I don't know the time constraints.
Why don't you just stay on as we are,
Absolutely
Caroline?
fine. Yeah,
Okay.
however you
All
want
right.
to proceed, Caroline. It's not a
That's
problem.
all right. I'll stay on just in case I then have some difficulties to get back in. So apologies, I don't know why my camera won't work.
So what we're going to do, we've got a small PowerPoint, but it's purely just as a bit of a prompt. And what we'd really encourage is this is your time. So obviously we're here to represent all the partners across Suffolk, and we are really open to any questions that you want to throw at us. I can't say we're going to be able to answer them, but we'll definitely take them away if we can't. So we're going to go through some key things that we thought may be relevant to your role and maybe slightly informative, but please genuinely sort of just pipe up as we go through if you've got any questions or you want to explore any of the subjects as we're going through them, if that works for everybody. I'm going to go through the slides, so I don't know, Hayley, if you can just shout if there's a hand up and I've missed it as we go through. So the first things we were going to just talk about was in relation to some of the concerns and issues. And there's quite a few, and I'm going to kind of put them up and we can kind of talk about them as we go through. These are some of the safeguarding issues, and I'm going to kind of hand over to Caroline from Health just to kind of go through some of these issues, and Michelle in relation to the contextualised safeguarding, and then we're going to go into probe into some more some areas such as exploitation in a little bit more detail because with the relevance to your roles. So if I want to hand over to Caroline first in relation to the areas that we've put up.
Yep, that's fine. I can't see. Are you sharing your screen?
No, we've lost the sharing.
Oh, so I'm happy to go and look at
Sorry, haven't I?
That's fine.
Sorry.
So as Tam says, we're going to cover off some of these issues. I'm not going to cover all of them off, but obviously within health, we will see many of these issues. So some of the things I'm going to talk about will be the second one. Oh, it's gone again. There we go.
Right,
is gender and body dysmorphia. So currently quite a topic of discussion, and we know there's quite a high number of children, young people, adults that may have some difficulties around their gender or body dysmorphia. And we're not saying that that is an issue at all. Many are supported by lots of different sectors across those services that would offer them help. And that is what, you know, it is required. But we've often seen some unusual cases, and some of what we would talk about is really the unusual, and we don't see them that often, but it has happened. So it may be that we would have some young people that are wanting to maybe identify as a different gender to the one that they were assigned at birth, but actually we've got concerns about who's driving that. Is that coming from the young person themselves? Is it something driven by family? Often we've seen it's been parents have been pushing this agenda, and actually when children have been spoken to or seen within different settings out of the home, whether it be in school or in hospitals, GPs, actually that isn't how they want to present. So it's kind of being mindful about how we see our young people and how they present. And I think key to what we're going to talk about today is always trying to listen to the voice of the child. Are we able to speak to that young person? Sometimes it might well be with their adult and their carer, and that's fine. Could it be that we could also speak to them alone so we can really hear their wishes and feelings? And can we also speak to other people that might know them? So, for example, in health, you know, it might be really important that we tie in maybe with education. So education hold a lot of information. They're seeing our children and young people a lot throughout the day, throughout the year, and they know these children well, and sometimes how they present with what a parent might say is not quite what the young child is saying or displaying. That also goes down there as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about fabricated illness. So fabricated or induced illness, historically you may have heard it called Munchausen's. So this is when children are presented with health issues, and we're not quite sure about the background to where that's coming from. We sometimes use the word now alongside fabricated illness as perplexing presentation, because often the presentation is perplexing. We're not quite sure what is happening for that young person or child. Some of the symptoms that are described, again, not as what we would see. They're not there all the time. They come and go. And what is really happening for that young person? So we know sometimes that these issues are driven by the adults and the carers for children to have some complex needs, some complex health issues. Sometimes parents do want to have a label for their child, a diagnosis for their child. And sometimes the way they're presenting, we're not able to do that. Child then presents with some more symptoms that again are often quite hard to diagnose. And that might be something that you might see within some of the work that you do when you're seeing children and young people, is you might have a parent tell you, well, actually, my child can't do X, Y, and Z. They've got A, B, and C wrong with them. Often it's things that are quite hard to put a finger on. So they might have some pain, they might have headaches, they might have tummy aches, they might have mobility issues. But then when the parent's not around, again, in schools is a classic one, the child is seen to be pain-free, they're running around, they're quite happy, they don't raise any concerns about their health, but it's very much driven by an adult parent or carer. To the extreme is we've had cases of children in wheelchairs, taken into school in wheelchairs, but again, school very often see that child is able to be mobile. So as we said earlier, a bit about speak to the child. What does the child say? How do they present? Is what a parent says to you, does it match with how you see the children? And it's about being inquisitive. It's about being curious. It's about asking those questions. Teenage suicide, mental health, quite a hot topic at the minute. You know, you'll have seen a lot in the news, in the press. It's talked about a lot about the services that are or not available to young people. Can we see them in a timely way? How can we support children to get the right treatment, help, support for their mental health, so that we don't have children that are sadly taking their own lives? And what we found in Suffolk with some of the cases where young people have taken their own lives is they have actually spoken to their peers. So children of 13, 14 have spoken to their friends about how they're feeling, and even actually talking about suicide. And their friends haven't really known what to do with that information. And of course, that has quite knock-on effects for them when that young person, their friend, then has gone on and taken their own life because that friend hasn't known how to support them. So possibly again, with some of the children, young people you might see, if they ever, talk about that they know of somebody that has expressed some wishes about self-harming, suicide. It's about how we support them to then get their friends and themselves some help and support. Whistleblowing, you'll be aware of obviously the Lucy Letby case, which has been obviously out there in the press earlier this year, middle of the year. Although it was quite a historic case going back some years, much of what was talked about was there were staff that were worried about that staff member, Lucy Letby, and some of her behaviours that were seen, some of the things she said, some of her interactions with parents and their little babies on the neonatal unit. And they did actually whistleblow, they raised concerns, they did all the appropriate things, but those in positions above them, higher than them, then didn't take appropriate action. So I think we're going to cover whistleblowing a bit more later on in the presentation, but again, very mindful if young people are disclosing to your staff about a staff member, another young person, and inappropriate behaviour. We have seen in the past where people have said, well, that's just how that person is. They're only having a laugh. It's a bit of a joke. But actually, we must take very seriously reports of inappropriate behaviour, and when young people or other staff members whistleblow about somebody that could be a colleague, somebody that you know very well, somebody that you've worked with, and actually that what they're describing and what they're disclosing isn't something you would have ever seen before from them, but actually what do we do with that information? How do we report it, and how do we escalate it, and how do we take seriously what that young person is saying to us? I'm not sure if there's anything particularly from health that you wanted me to cover off, but I'm happy as other people talk about some of the other issues that I can contribute from a health point of view.
Would you like me to step in as well now, Caroline?
Yes.
Okay. So, all right. So obviously, I said I'm Michelle. I'm from a safeguarding perspective. So this would be social care, but also a strategic role in terms of working with partners and third sector and voluntary agencies and settings such as yourself. I just wanted to say that the issues and the concerns that we picked to talk about is not because we want to say this is the crux and the only thing we deal with, because it isn't. I think what we just tend to do is we generalize in terms of thinking about emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse and neglect. But actually what we want to try and do is kind of raise your awareness to just some of these other aspects, because sadly most of what you see on this slide are things that we're dealing with as part of business as usual now in our professions and in our roles. And so it's about just trying to sort of reach out to you guys and just say, this is some of the stuff you may see. If it just sort of, you know, triggers a memory or creates some awareness that actually could make a difference to a young person, or you get a feeling that something may not be right, because if you get that feeling, it probably isn't right. You know, to give you the options and the avenues where you can talk through that with a professional, if that's what you felt, you know, would help you. I've been a club welfare officer myself in the past, and what I would say is, I think at times it can be a very pressured job. We know that you know, all the people involved in grassroots football are doing this on a voluntary basis. What we want to say to you guys is sometimes it can be really hard to speak out or to challenge, because for many reasons, but actually, you know, you are supported to do that, and we will support you to do that if you need advice. So if I was just going to touch base on abuse and violence, and the reason we wanted to put this here is to kind of highlight to you that we don't want people to just think of this as being female related. So obviously with honour abuse and violence, and we can within that we can consider forced marriage. There are a lot of signs that you can pick up from both boys and girls and young people in general. There's heaps of information out there. There will be lots of signs that, you know, it's about trying to have those conversations if you can. If you have those conversations and you can do them in a quiet way, in a safe way, and obviously speak to professionals around them. But there will be signs. You know, you can tell. Well, you can become aware and have an awareness and perhaps some suspicions in some respects for families where there perhaps could be honour-based abuse, because what you will have is that you could have children within that family or young people within that setting presenting as very differently. So, you know, you could have girls being treated very differently. You could have boys being treated very differently. And it will be things that they say and places there have been. You might find that you've got young people who've been out of the country for a period of time. And there just are things about that trip away that may suggest to you this could have been more than a holiday. What could be going on there? You know, obviously we look around for physical signs of concern, physical signs of abuse, but we're looking at the emotional side as well. So honour-based abuse, violence and forced marriage are a huge part of what we do. And actually what we have found in certain cases as we progress through, there will be outlets for these young people. They will go to sports clubs, they will play sports, they will be part of a lot of things outside of the home, because I think with these, some of these concerns, we think that they can be very sort of isolated. Young people are isolated in that setting. Sometimes they're not. They don't need to be isolated because they're just not going to talk about what's happening, but in an overt way, because the amount of control and pressure on these young people is quite significant from parents, carers and other wider family members and members of the community. So it's just about having that awareness and to be mindful in honour-based abuse, violence and forced marriage. There are as many risks from the community and particular communities as there could be from the actual parents and caregivers. The other thing that I wanted to bring up with you today is contextualised safeguarding, and we are going to speak about it more as a actual theme as we move through the presentation. But contextualised safeguarding is essentially extrafamilial harm. So this is harm outside the home. So we are looking at, this is where we're looking at our criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation, and it's that side of things that comes out of the home and into a context. And sadly, schools, community centres, sports venues, sports clubs, football clubs, lots of settings can be a context where this sort of interaction and this sort of abuse can be happening. So we're going to talk to you about it, and we're going to really highlight to you what contextualised safeguarding looks like, because we need you to understand, and what we want you to see is how young people can be exploited, that young people themselves can become the exploiters whilst they are being exploited, because it's a circular process. So it's the things that we want you to kind of just be aware of and look out for. And, you know, in your setting, certainly in terms of football, we'd be looking at, you know, young people who suddenly may have fabulous football boots that actually you're thinking, where did they come from? They can come with a whole range of new clothes. You're unsure, where did that come from? You know, these may be young people, you know, may not be able to simply afford that sort of level of you know, clothing, watches. And then obviously the other thing that we, you know, if there's many parts of this, using a mobile phone a lot, having 2 mobile phones, other young people who may appear on your at the club, at the ground, who perhaps ordinarily might be there, who you may think of there as spectators, but actually, you know, are they actually sort of controlling this situation? Are they putting pressure on a young person whilst playing or in the grounds, or on, you know, towards another spectator? So those are the kind of things we kind of want to highlight to you, because we know that contextualised safeguarding, extrafamilial harm, so criminal exploitation and sexual exploitation touches every part of society, and it's the biggest area for us in terms of creating awareness, but also strategically planning and managing at this moment in time. So that's my bit from this moment in time. I don't know, Tam, do you want to sort of talk about radicalisation? Is that your item?
Not my area of business, but I'm happy to talk through it. But you know, this is when we talk about how influenced young people can be. Radicalisation is obviously when we're thinking about people being drawn into counter-terrorism and that side of things. And again, these aren't things that are going to be overtly out there, but it might be the language that they're using. As you know, Michelle talked about contextualized safeguarding. It might be the type of people that are turning up. So it's just starting to think, and we'll go through some of the sort of responsibilities, and it seems quite overwhelming, but it's not. It's just about actively listening and looking at sort of changes in their behaviour, and just knowing, and we talk about like the Tate effect with the misogyny and how influential people can be. We've got influencers all over social media that literally influence our young people constantly. Some of it can be really positive, but equally some of it can have really negative undertones. So it's just listening and seeing and observing those changes and really taking some sort of positive action when you feel that things are slightly uncomfortable. But as we go through, hopefully we'll touch on some things in greater detail, but please just pop your hand up if you've got any questions as we go through the presentation. So Michelle sort of like touched on exploitation. It's kind of an area we'd really like to just take a little bit of time to go through, and apologies because obviously we don't know your backgrounds, but some of you might have quite a greater understanding. You will have heard the words, it's in the media, it's a national priority for us, but basically when we're talking about exploitation for children, it is someone who uses a child under 18 to commit crime for them. It's a form of abuse. And it can take various forms. So the first thing to understand is that a child cannot consent to be exploited. So what you will find is quite often the children won't know they're being groomed or exploited, or they will think they're consenting. So they'll think these are their friends, that they're doing it voluntarily, but actually they can't ever consent to be exploited. And that's really, really critical when we're looking at that kind of criminal element. There are loads of forms of exploitation. They can be really, really minor, and then they can go to really severe. And the key areas we kind of consider in relation to children is in relation to the criminal, sexual, financial, and we have modern slavery. And the sad thing is it does occur in Suffolk. You know, we think we're a sort of a sleepy country county, but actually we have all forms of exploitation happening around us, and it's probably the biggest growing national risk for our children at the moment. So it's to be aware for. When we talk about the exploiters, what they will be doing is using the children either in exchange for something that they want, or to get them to facilitate doing something, so use them to carry out the crime, or they'll threaten them with violence or fear. So there's loads of different forms that they can use. And some of these exploiters are incredibly clever. And that's the sad thing of it. So it won't always be, you know, go and do this, otherwise you're going to get beaten up. It's not always that threat. Actually, probably the scarier ones are the groomers that come in and they befriend and they get the trust of the young people. They make them feel, they isolate them. So they'll make them feel that everybody's against them and that everybody else is lying. They will fill them with lies about what other people think of them. You know, they'll get them paranoid, and they'll gain their trust. And then they've got that position of trust and they can exploit them as they move through. They don't have to meet them, so it's not always a physical thing. We have a lot of online exploitation happening regularly, sadly, and now, you know, any of you know, dealing with children, but anybody who has children, that they are a society brought up online. It's part of their normal business, and sadly, people who've got ulterior motives have used this sort of avenue. So we do find things through gaming. So there'll be gaming platforms where they can be exploited, and again they think they've befriended somebody online gaming and it's their mate and they trust them, and actually it's a source to gain their trust and then exploit them. And other forms of social media, I'm not going to go through those separately because that's a kind of whole nother input for you in relation to online safety, but there's quite a lot there. It can be an individual, and it can be a group. And usually what you tend to find is there is a bit of a power imbalance. So whether that is the age, whether that is the number, whether that is, and we'll come on to county lines in a little bit, but whether that is, if you're talking about gang relation, where they sit in the hierarchy of the gang, whether it's intelligence, there's a whole different reason, and it might not be overtly obvious to people initially, but there will usually be some kind of power imbalance, that child will feel exploited and then feel that they sort of owe that trust. Anything else anybody wants to come in on that slide?
No, Tam, it's Michelle. I was just going to say, you know, from what we want you to think about as well is, I think Tam's absolutely right. Those that are going to exploit are arch manipulators. They're absolutely excel in what they do in terms of grooming. Nobody comes along with groomer written on their head, so they suck young people in. They can often pick up on a young person's vulnerabilities. They create a sense of belonging, so that there is explicit trust. These people, you know, these are your mates. These are the people who are going to look after you. It doesn't really matter what your parents are saying. It doesn't matter. Parents of children and young people who are exploited will say, my child becomes a different person when they leave out our home. And that is absolutely what happens, because loyalties go out of the window, everything goes out of the window, and children and young people do not see that they are being exploited. They don't see it. They see this as we belong. This is who we are. And then they're in it and they can't get out. And what we want to try and make you aware of, this is not just teenagers. We are dealing with children as young as 8, 9, 10 who are being groomed to do various criminal acts of criminality and becoming involved in various offending, because they are part of a chain and they are part of what becomes an organised crime incident. So it is really difficult to try. Well, no, it's not difficult. I cannot stress enough. Don't think about this as always being adults. It can be, you know, young people to younger children. It can be teenagers to younger children, and it can be people who look like, well, it's just our mates.
Can I just ask Tam and Michelle, just in relation to understanding the techniques, is there any link between the techniques used by exploiters and scammers? In a way, both are trying to lure you in, groom you, get you caught in a web. What's some of the similarities and differences in the techniques and typology?
So potentially your scammer is an exploiter, because you're absolutely right. Your scammers will try to gain trust. Some of the things that they do is we call it debt bonding. So they will instigate the provision of gifts, and we'll go into some of the key signs to look for. So Michelle mentioned, you know, whether it's brand new trainers, that will be part of the sign of, you know, you're really good, I really value you, and they will provide gifts. Nothing's for free. The young person or child will think it's for free, but actually once that gift's given and they've got the trust, they're then debt bonded into that group or that individual, and they owe them a favour in return. And when you talk about scammers, a lot of the scammers that we have, you know, when we talk about our online, whether it's financial or otherwise, you know, talk about romance fraud, really significant increase in relation to romance frauds, and that is all about building that trust, selling their story, getting them to believe them, you know, kind of, they think empowering them, but actually what they're doing is they isolate them. So quite often they'll start to isolate them from the positive influences, be that friends, be that family, because they'll start sort of implanting lies and deceit. There's a massive thing about where they'll make them paranoid. So they'll make them, you know, their plan will be to isolate them, means don't trust the people that actually do care for you. So I know your mum or dad says this, but they don't really care. Or I know your friend said this and you shouldn't trust, but the reason they're saying this is because of. And you can see that theme when we talk about fraud as well as you can exploitation. And they're real equally, and the hardest thing for everybody is they're also kids and teenagers. And it is sometimes natural behaviour, you know, to rebel against your parents who've told you can't go out. So there is some real natural behaviours. It's where you start to see the stark differences that cause you concern. What we'll talk about, and when we talk about sort of expectations and responsibilities, is to be having those conversations. And just to be sharing your concerns, because they might be justified, but they might actually be explained. And either way, you do something right by sharing it as opposed to holding it in. That's a big thing, I'd say.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, I think one of the things, you know, when we're working with young people and children who have been able to come out of this situation, and over time, work is able to be obviously done with them to help them move forward on this journey. What is really interesting is children and young people, as Tam said, do not recognise even when they're removed from this situation, i.e., work is done and they're safely out of it, they still, and older children as well, teenagers and young adolescents, it's really hard for them to acknowledge even that they have and understand they have been exploited. Because when we talk to them, most of them will even, yes, this made me uncomfortable, this hurt, this, I was scared, I was this, I was that, but they will still see the exploiter inevitably as either being somebody who cared for them, their mate, or somebody who loved them, because that is what's created. And it takes a long time to help them understand that actually they weren't your mate, they didn't care about you, they didn't love you, you were a commodity to them. And that's a really hard thing, and it takes a long time for young people to be able to come through that and move on into adulthood having been in this situation.
As it does for adults, and adults are no different. So adults are exploited all the time, and a lot of adults won't see that they've been exploited. So we can liken it, and you will know people who get exploited, be it through relationships or otherwise. I think with adults there's another issue, which is shame and embarrassment, probably more so than children. But it often takes a long time for adults to realise that actually the relationships that they were in weren't healthy. And it's very difficult.
Can I add in another bit of just about exploitation and children and the way the groomers may work? So although we've talked about, yes, there is that bit about gifts, and do you see young people turning up within your organisation with that brand new kit, those brand new trainers? Of course, I think over time, those exploiters have got to realise that actually, that will raise questions now. Where did my son get those trainers? Where have they got that new phone? And I think there's been evidence to show that even younger children that have been exploited, the way they've been hoiked in has been as simple as they've been taken from McDonald's, and that is their payback. So it isn't just about having a new watch or a new phone. It is very, very simple, whether you want to call them gifts or treats, whatever it is, but actually younger children will have been taken literally for a meal at McDonald's, and that now they're owed. They owe something now to that exploiter. So I think, as we've said right at the beginning, it's being really mindful that sometimes this isn't the obvious. If it was so obvious, we'd be all over it. But it can be very, very small things like a treat to McDonald's, and that young person is hooked in now. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So what we'll do is we're just going to go through a couple, and this is not exhaustive by any means, but just a couple of the key triggers that we see in our lines of business that contribute towards exploitation. Just want to kind of put a caveat on this, that not any one of these says that they're definitely being exploited. Some of them are just simply in their own entirety that there is an issue going on. But what we do as partners is we talk really regularly around the safeguarding of our children and young people. And when we start to see these triggers, these are the conversations we start having, saying, right, this is out of character, or this is concerning because we know it's a trigger. Let's just dig a bit deeper and make sure that we know the reason for it and that we've got some safeguarding in place. And it's those early interventions that we'll speak to you guys about, where you've just got concerns, that you just start to raise those so that we can have those early interventions just to make sure that those safeguarding elements are in place. So the first bit is absence and missing. So what we know is that children that regularly go missing, whether that's from school or whether that's from care settings, so whether that's from their home address, but particularly children in care, when they are regularly missing, that's a very big indicator for us, and is a contributing factor to what makes them vulnerable to that exploitation. When they're missing, firstly, why are they missing? So what are they running from? So sometimes we have to consider that if they're running from home or school, that they've got some trauma that's going on in that place and it's not a place of safety. So we have to consider that first. And secondly, when they're missing, who are they with? And what are they doing? So who is keeping them safe or not, should the case be? And that would be one of the areas that we would consider. And like I said, doesn't mean that they're being exploited, but it will definitely be a trigger. What we'd say to you guys is, if you have someone who regularly attends their football, like literally is always there, but suddenly starts to drop off, is that expected because they're getting to the end of their playing season and they're moving on, or is that sort of unexpected behaviour that's going to raise a few concerns and think, you know, why are they now not turning up? What's happening? Is that something we kind of just want to ask a few questions about? Guys, just chip in if there's anything else. The other area we talk about is the family situation, and this can be quite complex. You'll all be aware there are various elements in relation to the sort of domestic situation of a child. Some of the key areas that we consider is if there is any domestic violence present in that household. The impact on children being present is huge, even if they're not involved in those violent incidents, but just their presence, the witnessing what is going on there. Substance misuse within the home address, whether that's by parents, siblings, friends, mental health, and that relates to everybody within that domestic setting. So parents' mental health, and again, it's just being observant that, you know, if you've got parents that need some additional support, are we happy that they're getting the support that then subsequently helps their children? And significantly, I guess probably a growing concern for all of us now is in relation to homelessness and financial hardship. So we're obviously seeing in the current state that we're in now that has a massive impact. And again, sometimes there's going to be shame and embarrassment that people try to hide that, but you know, I know sort of Michelle will be able to say, but we go into some properties where their domestic standards of living are really, really poor. You know, kids are not getting fed, there is no heating, you know, they haven't got clean clothes. So it's just looking at presentation of children to see whether there are any concerns in decline in relation to how they're presenting.
And just to add to that, one of the things that we've seen, we have seen, it's an emerging and increasing side of things. Tam obviously touched there on financial hardship. You know, families are struggling at the moment, and a lot of parents are having to work really long hours, and parents who work long hours may not be in the home, and there may not be anyone in the home to look after the children, perhaps as there was before. So that's a huge worrying area, because that creates an opportunity. So when we've looked at a cohort of young people who are involved in criminal activity through exploitation, what we have looked at with some of the young people we're working is common denominators is that they have a lot of time at home when there isn't a parent there, not for the family's own fault. Parents are out trying to earn a living because things, you know, mortgage rates have gone up, or this has gone up, or a job has changed. And actually that has created space for exploiters to be able to get in, especially if you think exploiters may be in the community. They become the community for that young person. So it's just another side of that.
Excellent, thank you. We've talked a bit at the beginning, and Caroline touched on, but the emotional and physical health. What we do know is that children will often open up to people they trust, and it might not always be people who are immediately responsible for them, so such as parents. And this is where you guys really come into it, because you will be building trust in those settings, because this is their hobby, this is what they enjoy coming to do, and this is not directly associated with them having to deal with that emotional, that physical health that may be spoken to when they go to the GPs, or by social care, or even by education. This they kind of see as completely detached, and therefore they may feel more comfortable just to express how they're feeling. So again, it's just actively listening. That you might get disclosures when kids don't even know that they're disclosing, because they may make comments about how they're feeling. Caroline touched on, you know, the suicide, and that's obviously an extreme, but actually when we start thinking about it, we've got disclosures can be made in relation to harm. So you've got the physical harm, we've got neglect, even the fear of harm, what they're worried about, and sadly the sexual side of it, but also the emotional. So we know 40% increase in relation to children, you know, in educational years of decline in mental health. So some of this, and again, it's not, it's pitching it right. You know, we know as children grow up, particularly through their teenage years, they're going to have hormone changes, and that inevitably impacts on their mental health. But it's where you start to see those big differences. Self-harm significant in our younger children now, both males and females. You know, eating, low moods. When they're turning up, it's just looking for really sort of changes in their personality. And actually just having those conversations, you know, even just asking them, are you all right? Because you might find they might talk to you. Go ahead, Hayley.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Tam, that really resonates with. So we recently we did a survey last year of players across Suffolk, and one of the questions that we asked the players was at the range from 7 to 17. If you had a problem or if you were worried about something, who would you go to at your? You know, it could be. It was quite an open question. Who would you go to? You know, parents, coach, friends, etc. And we had an overwhelming response that they would go to their coach, and I thought that spoke volumes, and that was really powerful. And that's sort of what we're trying to get across to coaches, that actually they do have such an important role in this child's life, like how much they're looked up to by these children. So
and often considered a safe space for children. So you know, children, young people, they're coming to the football, you know, the football club, they're coming to play, they see that as a safe space. So, you know, when children feel safe, they're more likely to be able to disclose or talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's recognizing that disclosure that they might be making as well. So that, you know, the coaches might just think they're having a chat with informal chat with them, but it's actually picking up on those key terms or appearance changes, etc., that they might be disclosing unknown to the child. They might be letting off that to the coach.
Absolutely.
So yeah, really important. Thank you.
Can I just come in there as well, Hayley, because that is absolutely fantastic and really important to hear, because we know, you know, as Tam has said and Michelle has said, sometimes children do find it difficult to disclose. And what we know about children that are being exploited is, of course, they will be told. You know, we don't tell people what's going on. We're not going to talk about this. And one of the issues we have in health is we have had young people present into A&E. They've been injured, usually a physical assault, attack, injury by other people. And of course, they don't want to tell hospital staff what's happened to them. They've probably been told, you don't tell. And sometimes the way that young people are being injured, it isn't just the obvious. So turning up with a black eye or a punch to the face. You know, we've had children. There was a young person who had a knife injury to their ear, which is quite unusual. That doesn't usually happen to children or young people. And of course, their explanation of how they've been hurt on their ear, it probably didn't fit, but in health we accepted it. So I think, you know, when children are turning up injured, we do struggle sometimes to get to the bottom of what's happened to them. We don't maybe understand completely who's attending with them. Those adults may not be appropriate. They may be adults we don't really want them associated with. You know, are we noticing they're frightened by those people? Are their parents in attendance? So it could be within the club. You know, a child may have an injury, and you might have that opportunity to ask how that's happened. And you too might want to be curious about, does that really fit with what they're saying? Could something else have happened to them? You know, we often in health get very small snapshots. We get a small amount of time to be with that young person. They don't know us. They possibly are worried about disclosing. So again, your environment might be a place where they could actually tell you exactly what has happened. And
plus as well, I was going to say, they don't see them as a figure, as an authority, do they? They don't. No. I don't think they see coaches as an authority figure, so they're more likely to open up to them.
That's right, or understand that. Yeah, maybe those coaches actually, you know, do have an understanding of safeguarding and would seek advice, maybe making a referral. But of course, they know school, police, social care are going to probe and ask questions, and that's what they're worried about. That you know, they're going to get into trouble with those that are exploiting them, and the next steps might even be worse than what has just happened to them. So really being mindful of injuries to young people, and how they say they've got that injury. So thank you.
Excellent. So the next area we talk about is technology. Sends cold shivers down my spine, because I know there's a lot of positivity and there's some really good work around technology in the introduction, but equally it's such a divisive tool that is put in the hands of very young children, and is a means of people to contact them that shouldn't be. So we have the obvious sort of exploitation over the phones, but also it's just about the other elements. So it's about the bullying. It's about the online sharing. You know, there'll be loads of online safety things that have done, but just things to start looking out about, you know, multiple phones. So have you got kids suddenly turning up with more than one phone? And if so, why? Like, why have you got children that are suddenly becoming quite secretive about their phones, or are having to interrupt their practices because they've got to take calls or they're getting texts? So where we talk about kids being exploited, quite often this would be the avenue that they would use, because every young person has a phone. And they will probably be being directed or instructed by their phones of what they should do and when they should do it. So, you know, I don't know what policies you guys have in relation to when they're in practice, but again, it's just being observant. Now, I'm not saying kids shouldn't have phones. They've all got phones. We know that. It's just about that safe use of phones and how you can kind of effectively support them and manage them with the phones that they've got. We talk about change, and we sort of touched on this throughout really, but changes to friendship groups and associates is really, really significant. Again, we know that kids, as they grow up, they will change. They'll change their likes, they'll change, you know, their interests, and therefore inevitably change their friendship groups as they sort of develop. But if it doesn't, like, I'll say it throughout, but if it doesn't feel right, it possibly isn't. So, you know, if you've suddenly got loads of people turning up at your football training that aren't involved, and they're sitting in the background and they're watching, you know, how does that make you feel, and how's that making that young person feel, and the other young people that are there? Thinking about the terminology, you'll hear changes in terminology. There'll be certain terminology that they use within the gangs and county lines that will start to come out, that you might just want to question, or you might just want to have a chat with that young person of what does that mean and why are you saying that, and you know, what, to see how far that they've got into it. We've talked about the secrecy, or they might become really defensive as well about friendship groups, that if somebody is to say something because they don't see that they're being groomed or exploited, that these are their friends and actually they've got their best interests at heart, and actually it's us that's not. But again, your opportunities within your area of interest, you know, within football, is you can have that conversation, because they don't see you as that natural position of trust. It comes from a police officer, social worker, or a healthcare. They're like, barriers go up and they just shut down. Whereas actually it's like, you're right with those guys sitting in the background there, or shall I just ask them to wait outside? You know, when they go to leave after football practice, who's waiting around outside? How are they getting home? You know, what's the policy about handing children to somebody, a point of safety when they leave practice, particularly as we get into the darker nights? You know, it's just thinking about those safeguarding. So it's not just necessarily, and you're not responsible by any means, but you know, what is the route to and from where you're training, and what realistic safeguarding elements can be put in place around those kids. We then talk about substance misuse. I say it's obvious, but you know, it's not just about the child, but it's about who they associate with as well. Some of the substance misuse won't be evident, and some of it really will be. So, you know, we know that we start with vaping, you know, we go to cannabis and the hard drugs, but actually it may not be that child directly, but it might be these people that are hanging around. Unfortunately, it might be the parental response, or people with parental responsibilities, that really give you some grave concern there. And then we've also got the other side of substance misuse, where we talk about body morphism, so where people are starting to get paranoid about how they look, and things like steroids or abuse of other sort of controlled drugs to enhance their performance. And I appreciate, you know, we're grassroots level, but it's just about those conversations that individuals are having, and you know, if they're raising any concerns. And then finally, we've kind of touched on, but it is just about being curious. You know, you've got children turning up and you've known them for years and you know their background, and suddenly like brand new trainers and brand new tops. And we've kind of talked about that debt bonding, you know, brand new phones. It's just about having that open conversation of where did that come from? And it might be justifiable. You know, they've got a great uncle over from Australia and he's bought them all gifts, and it might be genuine. It's like, brilliant, enjoy. Or you might start to think, okay, that's just sort of like triggering a few concerns for me. Just briefly then to touch on county lines. So kind of the definition of county lines really was used to describe organised criminal networks of street gangs moving illegal drugs, usually from large cities into more sort of rural areas. But actually we talk about county lines now as local movement. So we do have, sadly, a number of county lines within Suffolk, which either are moving drugs in Suffolk from one location to another, or moving them cross border, so they'll be coming from other counties into Suffolk. What we know with county lines is if they're moving any particular distance, quite often they'll be using train lines. They'll hop on trains and hop off trains. If they're being travelled in vehicles, quite often they're illegally in vehicles, in the sense that they're not insured, or the vehicles don't have any registered owners. And the key thing around our sort of county lines is that it's there's a dedicated phone line. So the phone line manages that county line, and we kind of name our county lines, and they're managed from a phone line. And young people, and sadly Michelle's right, is they get younger and younger, are used in criminality, whether that is to carry drugs, whether that is to go and inform people. Quite often with county lines, what we do is we get a drop, so they will send out a wide indication to say, I'm going to be serving up in this location at this time, and it goes over social media, so people know that the dealer is going to be in a certain location at a certain time. And it's not going to go away anytime soon, sadly. That is a really sad thing to say. All of us as professionals deal with it on a daily basis, and it's about us collectively working together to safeguard those children, to try and sort of explain what the consequences are, what the concerns and risks are. But like Michelle said, that's not always easy, because they're not always going to see it or agree with us when we're doing it. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, I was just waiting for a point to come in and just add a couple of things in there on the terminology. So what you see on the slides here is the unmet needs. So whilst this is not an exhaustive list, you as coaches within those formative years of working with young people and adults also, is you're very great in that space of finding that unmet need to get the best out of the player. But equally, it can be used by those people in that recruitment space, those exploiters. So if you can identify it, that's the bit really that we're really trying to get that message across, is if you see that unmet need, whether that's an emotional one, whether that's financial security, home life security, the lack of technology, or the increased technology in that person's life, those are those subtle nuances that you might pick up on the unofficial types of disclosures in those subtle spaces. And just a point really around the county lines. We refer to county lines in a professional capacity because it helps us determine what it is we're talking about. But for some of these families, young people, this is life. It's not about the county lines. It's a terminology for professionals. So don't look out for the brethren saying, I'm running a county line, because that won't happen. What you'll see is that all of these component parts start making the bigger picture, and then the unmet need is being exploited, and that's what you get, and that's the byproduct, if you like, of county lines. So don't expect to see somebody saying, I'm working in county lines today, is what I'm probably trying to focus on there. Thanks, Dan.
No, absolutely, you're right. Really sadly, like Will said, we do find there's family dynamics. So quite often where older brothers or sisters are involved, there will be a massive influence on younger children as well. That's another risk for us. We had a week of intensification. So basically we had a real drive around county lines in October. We had 31 people arrested. We had a significant seizure of drugs. Just under £50,000 was seized. Loads of phones, a number of weapons, knives. We engage with 1,600 school children. So we go over and we go out and we talk with our partners around the concerns, and try and just raise that profile and try and engage with them to try and let them see some of those risks around there. And we also do a number of visits to vulnerable adults. So you may have heard the word cuckooing, you might have heard that in the media, but basically it's a practice where people are exploited, often vulnerable adults. They can be vulnerable for a number of reasons, whether that's disability, financial hardship, addiction, mental health. And what will happen is these people working in these county lines will go into those addresses and they will basically take over the address. They may do that through threat of violence and fear, or they may do that by debt bonding them, by giving them drugs and then saying, right, we're going to be here. And quite often they'll stay in that address for a short term where they will sell their drugs from or prepare their drugs before they move on. on to prevent them getting stopped and seen by police. Go ahead, Michelle.
And I was just going to say, and one of the things that we do see, sadly, is, you know, kids on bikes. This is another way that kids will be running. So if you've got young people who turn up with a lovely bike, that's great. It probably is a lovely bike and they got it for their birthday. But actually, to get drugs around, kids will use bikes, e-scooters, you name it, they'll use it, especially for local running. Because as Tam says, you know, with county lines, think of it as local as well. If you need to move drugs around, you're going to use a young person or a child who's not known to the police because they've got less chance of being pulled, and they're going to need to get around. So they're going to be on a bike or a scooter because they're sadly not old enough to drive.
And we'll go through some of the things to look for, but when we talk about technology and friends, some of the things you'll start to see is signage. So it's about being in a gang, you know, and whether it's like the third side, and you'll start to see images of people on social media, including your young people, where they seem to be doing hand signs. Some of them won't have a clue what they're doing. You know, I've got a young nephew who sits there taking a photo and I'm like, what are you doing that for? Because he hasn't got a clue, but he's seen someone else do it. But actually what it is the sign that the gangs use. And they are just subconsciously doing it without any knowledge because of the influencing. And again, it's having that conversation like, what's this about? You know, and you can do it as low level as we want, but what we know in relation to most of the local gang related stuff is they do drill videos. So they make their videos and that's how they put their threats across when there's sort of tensions between the gangs. So you'll start watching them, they'll start doing drill videos which will be out on social media, which will either be encouraging violence or informing them of what's going on. That's sort of the key area. Okay, so sexual abuse within football. I just wanted to bring this up. So we've kind of talked about the safeguarding of children sort of outside of your world, but it would be remiss of us really not to look internally as well. And you will all be acutely aware of some of the impacts that we've had that have been both sort of like national and out on media in relation to some of the abuse cases within all sports. So just a little bit of background, in 2016, the child abuse scandal commenced in relation to football, where there was a number of professional footballers waived their rights and basically made significant disclosures historically about when they were being trained professionally and as amateurs that came in. In July 2018, that kind of exploded. So you had both the FA and the Scottish FA, along with 20 different police forces. And those are the stark numbers of what they identified. So that's 300 suspects within football. And these are people in positions of power. So whether that is coaches or people associated with those football clubs. You had 849 victims that came forward. What we do know for those victims come forward that there's a significant amount that don't. 2,807 incidents, which meant a lot of our victims were repeat victims, and there were 340 different clubs that were involved that we were made aware of, and 16 men were subsequently charged. And this was sort of like at your professional and your high level areas. But what happened is we've got what we call Op Hydrant, which is a national coordinating hub for historic sexual abuse. Concerning people in a position of power. So that includes teachers, clergy, coaches. And when this came out, what happened was then it actually empowered a lot of people. So what we found is we had referrals from all different sports, from basketball, rugby. There was a big piece in relation to gymnastics. We've had martial arts, tennis, wrestling, golf, pretty much every sport. So it's just about that fact that it's the environment as opposed to the actual activity. What then subsequently happened was in February 2021, Clive Sheldon formed a report, and basically he made various recommendations. Some of the key things that he did criticise the FA for was failing to act adequately on complaints or rumours of sexual abuse within the clubs. So that is where clubs, there were conversations going on, whether that was between players, whether that was between coaches, people in your positions as FA, that actually they heard and they knew something was happening, but nobody was actually making those referrals. There was significant delay in what they were actually doing to safeguard those children. So where there were concerns, there wasn't any immediate safeguarding measures put in place to prevent it happening again or protect other children. He said there should have been more well-being checks of players. So where concerns were raised, they should have been proactively going out and checking on their players. And he made 13 recommendations, and some of these you'll be acutely aware of, but clubs had to have qualified safeguarding officers. The FA board member had to have a designated children's safeguarding champion. There are spot checks of amateur clubs. There's a national day of safeguarding in football, and there is an annual safeguarding report. So we kind of just wanted to bring that in because that's really relevant to all of you, and we'll sort of give a bit of background about why some of those things have come about. So really, we kind of now want to focus on you. And I hope you I just want to sort of first, before I go into this, just reiterate and think, I hope we're not scaring you, because actually what you guys do is really, really critical. And we've only touched on it, but you provide a real safe space for so many children and young people. And Michelle said that, and Caroline have both said that a lot of young people will come into the environments that you run because that is their safe place, whether that is from domestic situations, whether that is from the fear or the actual concerns that are going on around them, be it at school or otherwise. So what you provide is really critically important to them. So what are we sort of asking, really? I guess we're going to just go through a few points, but just that taking and sharing responsibility. So these are kind of my takeaways, really. Just making sure as a club that people know who to go to. So just ensuring your colleagues are really clear who's responsible for the safeguarding element and never assuming that someone else is doing it. Quite often we'll have that conversation and say, yeah, well, I spoke to so-and-so and I thought they were going to make the report, or I thought they were going to put that in. We always say safeguarding, we'll go on to it, and I don't apologise for repeating it, but safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. But we just need to make sure that people are happy, they know who they're going to, who's putting it in, and who's going to take that further forward. So parental consent. There'll be various things that you'll need parental consent for in relation to your area of business, but it's understanding some of the complexities that sit behind parental consent. So it's just having that awareness that actually there are sometimes quite fractured domestic situations. So if you're aware or you've got concerned that there's some domestic violence going on because either people have told you, you've overheard conversations, or you've seen something, it's just making sure you raise that. You may be aware that actually there are orders in place, so there are limitations on parents having contact with their children. You might not be aware of this, but you may be. It's just making sure that you follow that through. Equally, my plea would be, if you've got some concerns about a child and you don't have any concerns about the parents, have a conversation with them and share that safeguarding concern, because the parents might be completely oblivious to it. And actually, you might be seeing them in a different environment where you say, actually, do you know what? They've really changed. I hope they're okay. And actually empowering the parents to be able to go and take that conversation and look at how that they can safeguard their children. Registration and record keeping. Obviously, you've all got responsibilities around that. The one big takeaway is everybody can share for the purposes of safeguarding children. So there's loads of things about data protection and GDPR and, the fines that we're going to face if we disclose sensitive information among us as partnerships. And what we'd say to everybody is, if you are sharing information because you've got concerns about the safeguarding of children, you're justified to do that. And that's what I'd say to people, to everybody out there, because what we know when we speak to people is, well, we didn't know if we could say anything. And we have that internally within our organisations of professionals. We're still getting that message across, but we just want to share that message with you. The other thing is just being aware you may hold critical information for us. So you may hold information that is not readily available. So we might have children that come to our attention and have never been involved in any of the services before. So we don't know the background to them. We don't necessarily know the parents or the home address or the telephone numbers or their friends or their associates. And that might be key information that you have. So it's just understanding that wealth of information that you might hold within your records that may help us to safeguard those children should they come to our attention.
And sorry, can I just add that you also may have a missing piece of information. So you may see something that you think, oh, isn't it? What do we do with that? But actually, if you then seek further advice, through MASH or through talking to your local police officers or somebody, you actually may then be contributing to the bigger picture that we do know, because when you're looking at it from your perspective, you think, is this something, isn't it? But actually the bigger picture may be absolutely, and that's the bit of information we needed. So please don't be talked out of it. If you think something isn't right and you want to talk it through, we're going to give you sort of avenues where you can talk through things at the end of the slide, at the end of the presentation. But if you think it isn't right, it probably isn't. Hold that. Don't get talked out of it. Do something with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, Michelle, I always say to the people that ring up and say, I don't know whether this is relevant. And I always say it might be the missing piece of the puzzle that is needed to take that next step. So, yeah, and as a professional or even as a volunteer in safeguarding, you get that gut feeling, don't you? And if it doesn't feel right, if it won't go away, then that's normally an indication that something needs to be done about it. So even if the welfare officer's picked up the phone and said something to me that I know is been bothering them, because or if they've dropped me an email that's been bothering them, so that's why I need to take it seriously and do what I need to do as well.
And I can't tell you enough how many times in our daily work we have a variety of settings, and I'm talking, settings where you'd think safeguarding would be absolutely crucial, and there's clear safeguarding policies, and it's absolutely crystal clear what you should do if you have a safeguarding concern. But even in those settings, which it's so obvious, there are times when we're trying to unpick something afterwards, and we say, well, why didn't you make that referral? Well, I talked about it with this person and they said they didn't really feel it was safeguarding. And we would say, well, that's not their role. There are people who can help decide whether it's safeguarding, but we just need you to refer it. And so that's why we say, don't be talked out of it. Just if you think it's a referral, if you think you're worried, get further advice, but speak to somebody and don't be talked out of it.
Thank you.
Sorry,
no, don't apologise. All really good stuff. So photography, film and media, you'll probably have your own policies on this. Is just being aware that whilst it might be okay to photograph one child, we don't know, you might not know the backstory to another child, and sometimes explaining that to parents is really difficult, but it's just having that awareness and sharing that awareness. We just talk about staff suitability ratios and CRBs, criminal record checks. Again, you'll have your requirements. The big thing I'd say that is really important is those CRBs, those criminal record checks, are really important even for people that you think you know. So what you might have is ex-players, or you might have parents that have been on the sidelines for years, and you've built a trusted relationship with them. Like, everyone has a backstory. Sometimes it's a really positive backstory, sometimes it's not. So just make sure that you carry out those fundamental checks for the safeguarding of the wider population, really. And that's at all ages. So you might have known the kids while they were quite young, but you only know them in one element of their business. You might not know them in the other elements of what they do outside of football, and that's where it's really important. First aid, I'm not going to talk about first aid in itself, but for me, first aid, and I know that Caroline will hopefully concur, is it's an opportunity to be professionally curious. So kids will get knocks and bumps, and some kids are more prone to getting injured than others. But if, when you are dealing with first aid or an incident and you see marks that you are not comfortable with, share. Like Hayley said, if you've got concerns, or your coaches are saying that they've got some concerns because there are significant, or they're in odd places, or the explanation the child gave just doesn't marry up, or they were really timid, or they became quite defensive, just share that information, because actually what it doesn't do, and we'll go on to trigger, is it doesn't trigger sort of like a massive catastrophic bomb where suddenly we're going to take all the children into care. What it does is it's a piece of a puzzle that says, let's just check this out. Let's just make sure we're happy with what they've said, and that it actually is as said, or is it a bit more of a concern and we need to dig a bit deeper. Social media we've touched on. So it's just being aware of social media and the impact it has. Some of it's really good. Some of it will be how you communicate with your parents, with your children, but it's also just being aware of some of those adverse sides of social media. We talk about empowering the child, and I believe this is one of the recommendations that came out of the Sheldon report. We have this in all areas of our business. We call it the voice of the child in policing, and I know sort of in health and social care they have it as well, and it's really critical, and it's something we're still working around, which is that we actively listen to what the child is telling us. But when I say active listen, and we'll come on to that, it's about listening to what they're saying and also what they're not saying, and whether their body language is conducive with what they're saying, which is, you know, they're looking really forlorn and sad and reclusive, but they're saying, yeah, I'm fine. You're like, well, you're not fine, are you? We also talk in policing, and again, it's something just to be aware of and to be consciously aware of, is about our conscious bias and sometimes our victim blaming. So just sharing with you guys as sort of volunteers in safeguarding, one of the areas that we were criticised for when we were talking about children that were regularly going missing is we would say, well, that's their choice. They've chosen to go out, they'll come back. It's just their behaviours. Actually, what they're doing is they're going out and they're becoming significantly vulnerable to exploitation. So it's about, when we talk about, particularly about children, but in adults as well, just making sure we are conscious of the terminology that we're using. And it's just putting that out to coaches to say, taking 5 minutes to have a conversation with a child and actually actively listen to what they say could be a really critical 5 minutes in that child's lifetime, and that could be the disclosure that you do get. I know you don't have time to speak to each and every one of them all of the time, but like you said, Hayley, you get that gut feeling where you think something's not right, and that's the time to have. An awareness of referrals. So we talked about, and Michelle uses it, it's a term I use, if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. I say it to all my officers. We do have a bit of sixth sense. You guys are all in this area of business because you've got a real passion. You've got a real passion, you've probably got a sort of background knowledge that when you're talking about something that makes it triggers in your head or it makes you want to think about it, our biggest advice to anybody is share. So whether that's sharing with another coach, whether it's sharing with the safeguarding, whether that is doing a formal referral in, what we just really want to get across is when someone puts a referral in to our multi-agency safeguarding hub, our MASH, it doesn't mean that we are literally going to go from 0 to 100 and that suddenly we're going to be knocking on the door and arresting people and taking children into care, because it doesn't happen that way. What it happens is that bit of that chunk of information comes in, and Hayley, you're absolutely right, it's like a part of the jigsaw puzzle. It might be a first bit of a jigsaw puzzle that we say, okay, we'll have a look at it, but there's no other bits of a jigsaw that raise concern for us, but we'll monitor it. It might be a real missing piece of our jigsaw puzzle which says, yeah, we've got loads of concerns, but we're just waiting for another bit of a jigsaw puzzle before we take positive action. I think people who aren't used to referring in get a bit concerned that if I say something and it's wrong, do I instigate a massive course of action that is going to come back on me? No. You have to look at it the other way, which is if I don't say something and that child is at risk, by me not saying something, have I prevented them being safeguarded? And that was probably what I'd say to people. So my big thing is just that awareness as a practice. You can put it out to people, say, yeah, share with us, but how do they share? Who do they speak to? How does that referral happen? I'm happy to hand over to my partners, Michelle, you know, in relation to referrals into the MASH.
No, I mean, I would just say, you know, we've got at the end of the slide, we're going to have at the end of the presentation, we're going to talk about the professional consultation line where you can phone to get advice, and the safeguarding managers will give you advice. If you know, we're happy to give you our email addresses if you just want to talk something through. You've got your own safeguarding support within the FA, and also often we find that our local PCOs, police officers who are in the community, often have really strong links with the grassroots football clubs. So speak with them as well.
Can I just come in from a health point of view and just sort of, it's really just to concur with what Tam is saying, and just to, just let you know that even across an agency as big as health, where we're meeting children all the time in all sorts of different environments and settings, part of the work that we're doing with our staff and practitioners all the time, and it comes out from many of our learnings from reviews where maybe we haven't got things quite right and kept children safe, they have been harmed, is that true bit about listen to the voice of the child. Don't just go by what the adult says. And if it is a gut instinct, that's fine. Sometimes I think, we're worried about, as Tam has said, what will people think if I say something and I've got it completely wrong? Mum and dad are the best. The kids got, everything going for them. There's nothing wrong. Usually we find there is elements of something. And the beauty of your conversations and your engagement with children and young people is when you make a referral, when it comes into the MASH, the MASH can pull all the information from other people that know that child, and that can help support that, yes, we're worried, or actually other information from police, social care, from education will actually tell us, no, we think that child is safe, they've got some protective wraparound things around them that mean maybe what you're seeing isn't quite the picture. So I think it's having just that confidence that what you see, what you hear, go with it, and that any of those agencies that are more involved will support you in that, and that no one has ever come back and said, why did you do that? As Tam says, the question more is often, why didn't we do something? So yeah, go with that.
Thanks, Caroline. So just in relation to sort of responsibilities for yourselves, really, and it just sort of a bit of repetition, but just sort of impounding that active listening. So like Caroline said, it's listening to what's not being said as well as what is being said, thinking about the tone and the body language. Do they truly reflect what you're hearing? And ask questions. Like the big question that, like, even my kids came home and said, oh, we had something on mental health, and it's like, ask the question twice. How are you? No, how are you really? And then pause is power, and often people open up when they've got that safe space to do so. We've talked about it. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Just be curious. Don't walk away from your concerns. Is it normal behavior? Is it what you're used to seeing in that child or the parents? Are they acting different? Is it what you expect because of the hormones? So some of them will have outbursts, or they'll become a bit reclusive because it's their age and you can see them going through it. And actually just speaking to the kids, asking them questions. We talk about sharing your concerns, and we've talked about that in quite a lot of detail, but seek advice. There are so many people out there to help you. Just have that conversation and know how to report it. Really important, and we'll go through that shortly. And the last thing for me is there an immediate safeguarding need? So if you have got concerns, does something need to be done now? Or is it just a concern that you need to share? And that's just where you need to think, if your concerns are that great, what are you going to do here and now that manages that safeguarding risk? Or is it something that you can refer is going to be done longer term, slower time? So just thinking about those. We are, as a generation, everybody is responsible for safeguarding of our children, whether that's in the voluntary sector, whether that's in the professional capacity, or whether that's as member of public, and everybody's voice is really important. The knowledge that we have that sits behind it is often very different, and therefore when it comes into the professional hub, we will be able to balance that based on your opinion and your view as to your knowledge of that child is really important. So when Caroline said it's really important to put some context behind your concerns, not just the child was really reclusive today. It's about, I've known the child for 5 years, they're always really chatty, they're always really engaging, but over the last few weeks we've noticed this and we've noticed that. And if you can put some context around it, it just makes it really more beneficial for the professionals to start to sort of like dip into it and maybe ask a few more questions. So just from that, sort of like going through a few things, just from your side, Michelle.
Yes, so as we said, so in terms of safeguarding managers in children's services, so Suffolk County Council Children's Services, there are 3 of us. So I'm obviously, as I've said, so my area is Ipswich, the coastal area. My area goes up to where Chris Burton is in the north of Suffolk. So he goes from Beccles up to Lowestoft, and then Karen Russell is kind of, I guess, if you think of everything west of Stowmarket, and we kind of meet. As safeguarding managers, what we do is we align ourselves with the police areas in terms of the safeguarding investigation abuse units, so our colleagues, so that we tend to work closely with them. So what we can do, and I'm very happy to make available to Hayley to give to you, is very happy to give you our emails. So if you want to talk about anything, we're very happy to talk you through, or to signpost you, or to, you know, to point you in the right direction if you feel it would be helpful.
Thank you. I'm going to flick through because we haven't got long left, but it's just in relation to our plan from the constabulary's point of view. And you'll see one of the key things there is around keeping people safe, protecting people from serious harm, and then preventing crime in partnership, which is what we're doing today. So I know someone put something in the chat about how do I know who my local police officer is. We're actually changing our local policing model, goes live in December, goes live literally in a few weeks. I say December, and that's literally a few weeks away. And basically, we've done a review in relation to the demand coming through, the capability of our response teams and the needs of our neighbourhood teams. So the new model is going to be split into 3 core elements. You're going to have a community policing team. So they're going to be 50 community areas. I'll show you a quick map with 80 community police officers, which are embedded in that community policing. So that kind of old Bobby on the beat, but they'll be looking at problem solving, working really closely with our partners, having local ownership. And these will be the people that you guys will you guys will link in with, mixture of police officers and PCSOs. And the way to find out who your local contact is will be when we go live in December on our website. You'll be able to go into Suffolk Police Constabulary's website, go into your area and find out who your local contacts are, and there should be forms of contact there for you. It would be we hope that as it builds that they were engaged. There won't be a significant difference. So if you've already got established contacts with your community officers, most people will be staying in role. It's just a slight change for us. We've then got the response investigation team. So they will be our sort of blue lights going out to emergency, also non-emergency. They would be dealing with missing people and crimes that are not complex to go into our CID and safeguarding. And then we've got a community prevention and partnership hub. And that is about standardising our practices across the force. So rather than it being a localised practice in the south and actually not being replicated in the west, we're going to look at sharing that best practice and making sure that we're replicating that across the force. And this is really what our map looks like. So like Michelle said, they're mainly aligned in social care to the same mapping as ours. And this is where people will be based. So Tracy, over to yourself.
Okay, I think Anthony and I are going to do this together. So we're going to do one slide at a time, if that works. Okay, so could you put all of that up there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So well, there were some additional slides in there, weren't there? I think that are not in this presentation.
There's
the one I sent
slide.
late had additional slides in it, but it doesn't matter. I could just focus on those. It's all right. There were slides that just showed who we were, our sort of meeting structure, and yeah. So I think just in terms of who we are, well, we've got Will, myself, and Anthony here. We've also got a board manager called Sadie Barber, and we have a comms and engagement person called Tara Rudd. So Tara does as it says, really, she does sort of things like podcasts, and she does, she'll go out to the community. She's done quite a lot of work out in some of the various shopping centres, talking to people about their understanding of safeguarding, because we do an awful lot of work with professionals, but we perhaps don't do as much with people, the general public, really, people out there who perhaps are not so sure about what safeguarding is or where to go. So she does quite a lot of that kind of work and puts the podcasts out onto our Spotify site. So this is just there's a lot of information on here, but it's just really showing you what the key areas of focus are for this current year and next year. And yeah, so I'll just pick out a few of them. As I mentioned, the podcasts, we do a lot of webinars which have come from our case reviews and also from issues that have been raised by key partners. You know, it might be a current issue around, you know, some of the issues we've been talking about today in this session. We may think, well, it's so critical, we'll do a webinar on that. We are doing, one of the things that's going to happen next year is a review of the threshold matrix. People will be aware that it was reviewed a couple of years ago, and there's a feeling it perhaps needs to be reviewed again, just to see what's missing, if there's anything else that needs to be added or changed. So that will happen in January and hopefully will then be in place in April. We are annual awareness campaigns. We work on those with partners. We've got our Safeguarding Explained report, which Anthony developed and Tara was involved. That's on our website. So that's really, I think that's come out of the visits and things that she did out in shopping centres to talk to people, just to sort of a document that says, this is what safeguarding is, and very simply says, you know, what it is, where you go, what the whole process is, so that people are clear about it, because I think sometimes people aren't, or just not sure where to go. Yeah, so engagement with families from our case reviewers and adults. Will's been doing a lot of that work on the adult side. So we've done sort of some videos with some of the people that have been involved in the cases, and that's been really helpful. So we're going to try and replicate that in children's, but it might also be that we visit those people. We've done some visits to people where, you know, they've been involved in the cases. So it might be the parents of children that have, you know, sadly been abused or died. So we'll do a visit to those parents to talk through with them what we're going to do. Section 11s is a statutory requirement on all agencies to do a Section 11. So what we've done, we've received them all in, summarised them, and then we're going to have Will and I are going to look at that learning and work on how we can change that learning, or things that they want changing or want to see different from those Section 11s. And yeah, the themes from our children and adult reviews, we have a lot of themes that come through, things like fathers not included in cases often, mothers given the priority when maybe it might be that the father is difficult or seen as being difficult, so people avoid them and him and focus on the mother. We've had quite a lot of cases where we've had babies die sadly from overlay, and they've often been young parents and parents that maybe are smoking, taking alcohol, taking drugs, and not understanding the implications of that. Yeah, so if you go on to the next slide, Tam, then it just follows on a bit more. Yeah, there is a lot of detail. So we are developing, we have developed a training meeting with the key leads. So that would be the key leads in health, police, Suffolk County Council workforce team, NSFT, ourselves, because one of the things we want to do is not duplicate what we're doing. We want, because they put on an awful lot of training, and we want to make sure that we don't duplicate that, but also where we've got key issues, we can say, well, should we do something jointly? You know, rather than us just do it as a partnership, we can work with everybody jointly. I've been doing quite a lot of work with Active Suffolk with James Payne. He's got some funding to recruit some welfare officers. So obviously similar roles to yourselves. And I'm involved in helping him with that process and then with the interviewing process. Will's been doing work on the Herbert Protocol and MCA, and he's been working with police leads to get that awareness, really, greater awareness of what that protocol is. And also financial abuse strategy, working with adult social care on developing that. We work with the education team on the statutory requirement for schools to complete their safeguarding audit. And so the findings have come out from that. So what we will do is work with the education team on seeing what we can do to help improve things, or to, you know, look at the multi-agency aspect that they've mentioned in this audit and see if we can improve that around ourselves, health, police and social care. One of the things that comes out quite a lot from our case reviews is sometimes that professionals don't always use their curiosity or are not showing enough curiosity. So ACS and Will have been involved in putting together some guidance on professional curiosity, and it also came to the leads for children as well. So it's not only, it will be a document that looks at adult and children, but curiosity across the piece. So that's in the process of being developed and will go on the website, and will also go out to professionals as well. And then we're doing work supporting public health on producing a video. We mentioned earlier about the fact that mental health, emotional well-being for children and young people at the moment is a really is really critical. There's a lot of children and young people, and we've had quite a number of cases, suicide cases. So public health are doing I've got a big strategy on that, and we are working with them on that. So they're going to be producing things like a video. They've got together a theatre group which will go into schools. They're just sorting out the funding for that. And I mentioned about the engagement of fathers, male partners. We will be setting up a task and finish group to look at developing some guidance and some resources to help professionals in that. Anthony, did you want to say anything more?
Well, after 1 hour 31 minutes, I hesitate, but I'll just say a couple of things. If you wanted to explore some of this in more detail, for example, on that slide, we say it's the MCA. It's not a basketball club. It's the Mental Capacity Act, and we're very happy to do another one of these, perhaps with more focused issues. I'd probably just say 2 or 3 things and abandon reference to the couple of slides I can see. The first thing is to say, in the clubs, you're all part of a network in Suffolk. There are several thousand specialists, family members, volunteers, people in positions of responsibility who are looking out for children or adults at risk. And so you're part of our team and network. We're responsible for safeguarding in Suffolk and overseeing it and making sure everybody's doing what they should be doing. So you're not on your own, and we're with you the harder it gets. And I think one of the issues we're finding this year is it's a little bit more complex than last year. And what we were saying last year is it was a little bit more complex than the year before. And there's some data to back that up. So it means that you need to talk more and communicate more. Every child is a jigsaw puzzle, every adult is a jigsaw puzzle, and you can only fit all the pieces together with all the information. You have to share it. And I suppose what comes out of many of our cases, we review the worst cases in Suffolk every month. What comes out of that is often not doing the basics well. It's not the knowledge about some incredibly difficult technical issue. It's not sharing information, missing what's going on in front of you, and not because you're hopeless, but because your attention is drawn somewhere else, as Tam and Michelle said, or it's simply invisible, and you have to watch out for those signs. So I suppose what I just conclude by saying is refine your antennae, be curious without thinking everybody's abusing everybody else, but be careful of all the people who are hidden in plain sight. So at the same time as you're looking at ball skills or the balance on a vault for a gymnast or racket tension for a tennis player, just try and see the person and the whole person as well, not just their technical skill. And the cases in Suffolk that have really gone wrong is often where people are known, but either the information isn't shared or we've just not seen the whole person. We've just seen a bit of someone, and that hasn't been enough. So that's all I'm going to say, especially as as we're, I think, close to being out of time. So I guess I'll pass back to either Tracy, Tam, or Michelle, who are leading our session tonight, to say thanks a million, and over to you to wind up.
Thanks,
Unless
Anthony.
not winding up, we might be going on till 10. I may just not have the right end time, and we should leave space for colleagues to come in with things if we can.
Yeah. I mean, the last slide is just what some of you may know this already and probably do know this, but it was just to put a reminder there, really, in terms of, what you do around reporting an immediate risk, how you contact customer first, the professional consultation line, which you can access because effectively you are professionals in your role, and then the LADO referral, which is concerns regarding an adult. We just wanted to put those there as a reminder. Yeah. But yeah, I suppose any questions that people have got.
More observations and learning.
Yeah.
Please for help.
Stunned silent.
I mean, I for one would like to say it's been absolutely fantastic to have you all. I really, really appreciate the time it's taken to put this together, and you are incredibly busy people, and for you to take time out of your evening to come and deliver this to us, and the volunteers to take your time out of your evenings to listen to the session. I can't thank you all enough. If we just get a little bit of this message out to one or two people, we've made a huge difference. So yeah, I'm really absolutely chuffed for the session tonight, and it couldn't have gone any better. So the content was just perfect, spot on. I think there was a lot of information in there, but really key information relevant to the area of the sport that we're looking at, and yeah, absolutely over the moon with the session tonight. So thank you so much for everything you guys do, everything the volunteers do to make Suffolk a safer place to play football and to be a child in a family. So,
and just to say, I completely concur, Hayley. You're all volunteers and you're doing a fantastic job. I know it's quite overwhelming because we've focused on all the negatives, but I just want you to go away and say, don't underestimate the positive impact you have on so many young children's lives. It's amazing, and it's so critically important, as we were in this social media forum, that these kids get out, do something active in a safe environment. They feel trusted and they feel safe. So my big thanks to each and every one of you, because you're all so incredibly busy, but like Anthony said, you're part of this massive wide thing that is there to safeguard the children of Suffolk. So my thanks.
Yeah, I mean, that is so right. You liberate children, young people, you empower them, you give them strength, make them more resilient, you help with social and emotional learning. Yeah, it's fantastic, really fantastic.
And also just to say, if there's anything from this session this evening that you feel you'd like to know more about, or anything that we can add to, if you speak to Hayley, she can come to us and then we can come back and give you whatever it is you need.
I was going to just say that, Michelle, because sometimes we don't know how to pitch this, do we? Sort of Tam and Michelle, and it's very nice you've complimented us and said, yep, it's great. But maybe, and I appreciate sometimes on the evening it's difficult for people to ask questions, and hopefully, you often go away from these things and you think back and you reflect. So if there's anything anybody does want to ask because they think of it later, then Hayley, pop us an email. Any one of us can try and answer it. And if you think of things for next time, I know this is maybe, I think it's the third year I've been involved, which is brilliant. But if there are other things for another time that you would like us to cover, or how you'd like this tailored, honestly, that's what we need to hear. We're not here to be precious to just talk about what we think we need to cover. This is about how you guys get that learning, confidence, whatever you want to call it, that helps you, do your job a little bit more effectively in keeping children safe in Suffolk. So it's just another string to your bow in all those great things that you do. So happy for lots of feedback from you if you want to go away and think about how it can be made really a beneficial session to you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody, and I'll let you all get off to your EastEnders or your dinner or whatever it is you've got planned now for the rest of the evening. And yeah, huge thank you once again. Can't say it enough. Go well, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hayley.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.